in 2025 ranged from hundreds of grams up to 5 kilograms at a time, transported by road to Bosaso. At the exit point, a levy was applied, about 13 cents per gram, less than 1% of the gold's value. But here's the contradiction. If the trade exists and the levy exists, why does the public income almost disappear? Budget projections expected more than $300,000 in mineral export revenue one year. Recorded collection, none. The following year, projection again exceeded $260,000. Recorded revenue by mid-year, about $500. So three things exist simultaneously: an international export industry, a formal taxation system, and almost no public benefit. Researchers examined export receipts, found something even sharper. Printed receipts existed, but some transactions appeared inside the customs database marked not paid. Seriously, not paid, not a rumor, a mismatch between paper and ledger. At that point, the investigation moved away from the miners, because resource economies are not controlled at the pit. They're controlled at the checkpoint, the moment a shipment receives permission to leave, and all of those shipments converge on one place, Bosaso. Milxo is the extraction site. Bosaso is the gate. The report shows export documentation repeatedly issued through the same pathway. A contact number attached to those records correspond to an individual identified as a relative of Puntland's president, Saeed Abdullahi Dini. Researchers asked ministries whether the company was licensed. Officials did not clearly confirm. Company registration records connected to the sector also reference ownership documentation associated with the president's family, including his son, appearing within the business structure around the trade. But access to the export lane appears concentrated. Then another document emerged, a mineral exploration concession covering more than 1,000 square kilometers of Sanaag associated with a foreign-linked company called Euromark. Followed the paperwork, the same detail began appearing again and again. A company connected to the export pathway, tied to individuals related to Puntland's president, company records referencing his son in commercial structures, a concession document linked to a foreign-connected firm, a local representative at the mine describing himself both as a company agent and part of the mining administration, a Sudanese intermediary moving between Puntland and Gulf buyers, and then something even stranger, phone communication, repeated, between mining operators and tax collectors associated with Al-Shabaab attempting to extract payment. The mine kept operating. The gold kept leaving. The authority remained unclear. So the question investigators faced: if businessmen, officials, intermediaries, and armed actors all appear around the same revenue stream, who is actually governing? In January 2026, an international research organization published a detailed field investigation about a remote mining settlement in the mountains of northeastern Somalia. The report described the gold rush in a place called Milxo, a town that had expanded in only a few years into a settlement of thousands of miners, traders, transporters, and families. It characterized the area as an ungoverned frontier, a vacuum where state authority was weak, regulation uncertain, and security contested. On paper, the conclusions seemed familiar. Remote resource, a fragile state, armed groups nearby, gold leaving the country. To many outside observers, the story almost wrote itself. But the problem with frontiers is they look simple from far away. And this documentary begins with a different question. Not what outsiders fear Milxo represents, but what Milxo actually is. Because the gold itself is not the mystery. Gold rushes follow predictable patterns across history. California in the 19th century, Congo in the 21st, and dozens of resource frontiers in between, where formal economies are absent. Extraction appears first, government appears later. What makes Milxo different is not the gold, it is the political environment surrounding it. Milxo sits in northern Somalia, a territory claimed simultaneously by multiple administrations, mapped different by different authorities, and understood locally in yet another way entirely. On official maps, sovereignty is argued. On the ground, legitimacy is negotiated. And in the gap between claim and control, something unusual happened. Our community built an economy faster than institutions could catch up to it. Not a state project, not a foreign concession, not a corporate mining operation. A bottom-up economy, organized largely by local actors, financed through diaspora capital, structured through customary leadership, and protected through informal arrangements that do not fit easily into conventional categories of either government or insurgency. The 2026 investigation raised serious concerns: environmental hazards, illicit trade routes, possible extortion attempts by armed groups, and the role of political elites in resource capture. Those concerns deserve attention, but they also risk producing a familiar analytical mistake. When fragile states are studied, the absence of formal government is often interpreted as the absence of governance. In Somalia, that assumption is frequently wrong. Long before modern administrative borders, Somali societies developed systems of law, arbitration, and authorities based on customary norms and clan institutions. These systems did not disappear when colonial treaties were signed, nor when post-independence governments were formed, nor when the central state collapsed in 1991. They adapted. In this area of concern, the territories surrounding Milxo, local leadership structures often remained the decisive authority in everyday life, even while external administrations asserted jurisdiction. This is the central problem in understanding Milxo. Observers are looking for a state and finding none, but the residents are not living without order. They're living inside a different form of order. So this film does not begin by asking whether Milxo is legal or illegal, but it begins by asking a more difficult question. What happens when economic development arrives before political settlement? When a resource boom appears in a place where sovereignty itself is unresolved? When communities create livelihoods faster than governments can design regulations? To understand Milxo, you have to stop looking at it as a place and start looking at what changed after it appeared. Because Milxo didn't just add mining activity, it rewrote trade statistics. For years, Somali gold exports were small and irregular, low millions, and barely visible in the international commodity data. Then settlement emerged in the Sanaag mountains and the curve bent. Exports rose into tens of millions, then roughly 100 million, then over 200 million. By 2023, gold entering the United Arab Emirates from Somalia was valued at roughly 315 million annually. A remote mountain settlement had connected itself to a commodity trade measured in hundreds of millions. And industries that large normally leave fingerprints. They leave rules, records, and public money. The records exist to document courier shipments, hundreds of grams, international markets. A levy was applied, about 13 cents per gram. Why does the public income almost disappear? Budget projections expected more than $300,000 in mineral export revenue one year. Recorded collection, none. The following year, projection again exceeded $260,000. Recorded revenue by mid-year, about $500. An international export industry, a formal taxation system, and almost no public benefit. Researchers examined export receipts, found something even sharper. Printed receipts existed, but some transactions appeared inside the customs database marked not paid. Not paid, not a rumor, a mismatch between paper and ledger. At that point, the investigation moved away from the miners. Because resource economies are not controlled at the pit. They're controlled at the checkpoint, the moment a shipment receives permission to leave. And all of those shipments converge on one place, Bosaso. Milxo is the extraction site. Bosaso is the gate. The report shows export documentation repeatedly issued through the same pathway. A contact number attached to those records correspond to an individual identified as a relative of Puntland's president, Saeed Abdullahi Dini. Researchers asked ministries whether the company was licensed. Officials did not clearly confirm. Company registration records connected to the sector also referenced ownership documentation associated with the president's family. But access to the export lane appears concentrated. Then another document emerged, a mineral exploration concession covering more than 1,000 square kilometers of Sanaag associated with a foreign-linked company called Euromark. The public did not learn about it through legislation. They learned after documents circulated. Because normally a concession of that scale begins with a debate. Here, debate began with a leak. Researchers visiting the mine encountered a man who described himself both as a company representative and part of the mining administration. Authorities did not publicly verify his role. At the time, interviews referenced a Sudanese intermediary operating between Puntland and the United Arab Emirates, involved in some trade pathway, moving gold outward. Now the structure around the mine shows overlap: private company, administrative authority, foreign commercial channel, not separate layers, one network. And then the investigation moved to beyond documents. Because financial networks leave paperwork, power networks leave communication. Researchers mapped phone communication tied to individuals operating around the mine. Who called whom and how often? And this is where the story changes. The reports record repeated phone contact between a tax collector associated with Al-Shabaab and individuals connected to mining company operators and representatives linked to the concession activity. Multiple calls, not one, sustained contact over time. The diagram does not show militants running the mine. It shows something else: armed actors attempting to tax a revenue stream and commercial actors negotiating to keep the trade moving. But one detail matters most. One of the central communication nodes appeared to be a figure described simultaneously as a business representative and connected to regional ministry of energy, minerals, and water. Authorities again did not publicly clarify that role. Now the question becomes unavoidable. If armed actors attempt taxation and business negotiate pathway and administrative figures appear inside the same communication web, what system is actually governing the economy? Because the mine is not the decisive point. The decisive point is permission. At the airport, at the port, at the moment gold becomes international money. And that place, Bosaso, is also where security forces, port operations, airport clearance, and foreign commercial relationships converge, including Gulf infrastructure and security arrangements. So three forces now surround one resource: armed pressure, commercial transport, political authority. Milxo sits in the middle. The mountain produces wealth, but the wealth concentrates at the exit, a $300 million trade. And the public ledger shows hundreds, a concession the size of a district. And the public learns after the fact, a region described as ungoverned, yet export permission functions precisely. So the contradiction sharpens. The frontier is not ungoverned, it is governed somewhere else. The international narrative focuses on security in the mountains, yet the measurable irregularities appear at the official checkpoint. Documentation, databases, revenue accounting, and the gold continues to leave. Its destination is consistent: Dubai, where raw gold can enter global markets, and once refined, its origin cannot be traced. So the supply chain becomes clear. Labor stays local, environment risk stays local, value leaves. Milxo itself expanded rapidly, thousands of residents, multiple mining operations, mercury and cyanide processing, regulations struggling to keep pace. For the miners, this is livelihood. For traders, commerce. For government, it should be the public revenue. It should be about the public. But when public revenue does not appear, the issue stops being geology and becomes governance. Milxo is therefore not a gold rush. It is a test, a community-created economy faster than institutions organized around it. Now three realities collide: local survival, political authority, global commodity markets. And the story matters beyond one mountain. Because resource booms do not only produce wealth, they produce expectations, whether wealth becomes public infrastructure or private circulation, whether institutions strengthen or public trust erodes. The report gives a structure, and from that structure emerges the real uncertainty, not whether gold exists in Milxo, but whether the system managing its movement can fully explain itself. That's the real question.